Well, Australia losing 3-0 to Ecuador in the first round of Davis Cup qualifying. I'm joined here by the first service, Brett Phillips. Brett, what are your initial thoughts?
Yeah, look, it's a tough one to swallow, isn't it? I mean, you and I were in Bologna, sitting there in that room when they were doing the draw for the Davis Cup qualifiers in February, and we're sort of working through, where's Australia going to go? And then we saw the balls come out, and we're going away to Ecuador. So the first thought that popped into your head was, well, gee, we're better than Ecuador, certainly rankings wise, but boy, oh boy, you got to go to South America. It just makes the equation so much tougher. Clay is always going to be a factor if it ties in South America. The thing with Quito as well, the closest capital city in South America to the equator, unpredictable weather. They either have a dry or a wet season, and it was really wet and damp and overcast. The conditions weren't great, and there's the high altitude factor. And that certainly suited the Ecuador players. If we go back, and you and I were looking at some footage of their previous tie when they beat Bosnia late last year, euphoria. So another tie for them was going to spell a bit of danger. And we talked about it through December and January that, gee, this is, yeah, we're trying to convince ourselves that we should get the job done here, but we knew we were going to be certainly challenged. And as soon as we knew that Alex de Minaur wasn't going to lead the Aussie charge, well, what does that team look like? And are they good enough to get the job done? And the last couple of days, we just haven't been good enough. We've been in every match. Certainly, Rinky and Ducks on that first day had huge chances to give Australia a 2-0 lead, and the doubles came down to the finest of margins. So we weren't blown off the park, and we shouldn't be, by Ecuador. But it's a blow to Australia. We find ourselves back in territory where we were quite some time ago. It wasn't that long ago we were making the final eight final in Spain, of course, in Malaga. And now we find ourselves really having to reset our whole Davis Cup program. What's the team we go with going forward? Does the captain stay the same? He's been in the job for 10 years. And maybe it was going to take a moment like this for everyone to just get around and say, okay, where do we go from here? Because it's been a long drought since we've won the Davis Cup.
We'll get to Lleyton Hewitt a bit shortly, but just in terms of this matchup, coming in, me personally, I always thought it was going to be tough, right? Going there, high altitude, coming from a soccer football background, you see the likes of Lionel Messi for Argentina come out and say he just hates playing in places like Bolivia, Ecuador, the high altitude. You can barely breathe sometimes. It's that difficult. So to acclimatize and adjust to those conditions is very tough. And then also to obviously have a less squad, right? No Demon or no Popperin. Jordan Thompson got injured. And that was a weird selection as well for him to play in the doubles. What were your thoughts? And obviously, Vukic as well. You mentioned yesterday to me off air that he's had quite a solid clay record. So, what were your thoughts on him not playing there?
Yeah, from what I understand, from what people have told me, he was never really in consideration. He was part of the squad. Lleyton was going to go in a different direction, and Rinky had been striking the ball pretty well this year after a tough year with injury last year that saw him outside 100. Look, Jordan Thompson has always been Lleyton Hewitt's go-to man. And, I think he coming in, won 11 matches in 17 appearances across singles and doubles, and he can be relied on. But he got that arm injury. Rinky comes in. Yes, Vukic has played a higher volume of matches across his career at all levels on clay, but maybe wasn't quite hitting the ball as well. The one thing we don't see is the practice week. And now Australia got there early enough to acclimatise, get used to the conditions. We don't get to see who's striking the ball that well. So look, when you lose, you pull apart all these decisions. Obviously, Tomo was good enough to go and play doubles today. He had the sleeve on his arm to protect it. We don't know the extent of that arm injury. Doubles, singles, a different proposition. Look, it was going to be tough, particularly if you go back to Metza, Alvaro Metza. Now, he's 200 in the world, so he's actually no mug. This guy can play, but he's played pretty much 95% of his matches across his career on clay. So you call him a clay court specialist, and he was able to, lead the charge. And just goes to show the margins are small. Andrade was, 257 in the world. So are they capable of beating a player who's 100? Absolutely. We see it on the tour all the time. But, gee, the conditions for Ecuador just played into their hands beautifully. And that crowd, we know what a Davis Cup raucous home crowd can do
Mhm.
for any nation around the world.
Now, obviously, like I mentioned before, if the likes of Diminor and Popham were playing most likely this would have been a different story, right? And it goes back to the question of these first round qualifying. These top players aren't playing, right? Only one player out of the top 10 in this first round of qualifiers actually played, and that was Jack Draper for Great Britain, because obviously coming back from injury. How is there a solution to this? For me, what I would do is, if you don't play the first round, and I've said this to Connor Joyce, one of our members of the First Serve, if a
Yep.
player doesn't play in the first round, then you don't play in the second round. I know it's a bit harsh because some players are injured and it's a legitimate excuse, but there's got to be some measure to try and, increase the integrity, because it's just, yeah, I just can't seem to find an answer.
Yeah, but can I be devil's advocate for a minute? Don't you think though? I mean, I think De Minaur had every right to
He did, yeah,
say,
for sure.
for the first time ever, I'm going to not play, and he's always expected to put his hand up and play, and that's been the DNA of Australia, Davis Cup history. You want to play and put the green and gold on, you bleed for your country. Well, times are continuing to shift. Alex had to prioritise. Alexei Poprin has never really bought into the Australian Davis Cup scene on a consistent basis. He's played, spasmodically over the last few years. I don't see it necessarily being a huge issue, because look at the storylines that have come out of the Davis Cup this weekend. A world number 457 carries India on his back, which I think is a great story. And that could be the making of that young guy on the tour, what he gets out of the Davis Cup. We saw a young 16-year-old play for Ecuador today just to get his first taste. Kubler beat him in straight sets, but he gets a taste of it. For me, it doesn't take away the integrity. I never felt this, Christian, even when Federer, Djokovic, Nadal, Murray didn't always play Davis Cup all the time. I always felt Davis Cup could survive without those guys, because it's country v country. And the great part about the Davis Cup is the unique sounds. Everyone puts it on the line. And, I don't necessarily feel like it needs the absolute best for that competition to have integrity, in my view.
Okay, what if it's the pinnacle though, isn't it? Isn't Davis Cup supposed to be the pinnacle?
Well, absolutely, it was always regarded up there with the majors, particularly when it was best of five, because they were the only two formats that had best of five. Now, I've accepted that Davis Cup going back to best of, I've accepted it going back to best of three. I'll probably never totally buy into it. And we were in Bologna last year. We saw Italy on home soil, what that looks like when a home nation wins a Davis Cup. If it had been two neutral teams, would have been a very different atmosphere. So I'm all on the train with everyone else that believes that we've got to get back to the old format that was so successful for 100 plus years, and it's down to two nations at the end. And you're either playing at home in front of a raucous crowd, or you're playing in enemy territory with no support or little to no support. That has to come back into vogue, and I think eventually, I think it will. I feel convinced that will, but I don't think we'll be going back to best of five, just with the physicality of tennis across the whole tour. So I'm okay with best of three. I'm okay with some not so bigger names shining in the Davis Cup. I still think it's got its unique appeal.
Okay, on captain Lleyton Hewitt now. So we've got to give him some credit, right? He's made back-to-back finals of the Davis Cup, I believe, 2021, 2022. Just fell short there. Does his position have to come under question, or at least under some bit of scrutiny? Or do you think Tennis Australia won't ask the question, I'll just let him continue? Because I just think not making the finals last year and now not being able to progress past the first round this year, I know there were circumstances we touched on before, the players available, but does Hewitt have to take some of the blame still in that?
Look, I think the position deserves to have some scrutiny, no doubt. He's 10 years into the job. Now, history says that Australia have had, Neil Fraser, 25 years, John Fitzgerald, 10 years. I think John Newcombe was there for a long period of time. So we've had some longevity with our Davis Cup captains, going back over decades, really. It's an interesting situation. At the time, you couldn't have thought of a better person to lead the Davis Cup team. He's our most successful Davis Cup player, and obviously he's carried that passion off court. Does it mean he's guaranteed the job forever? Of course not. I think it's going to depend on what happens with the leadership of Tennis Australia, and we know that is right now a decision we're expecting, something regarding Craig Tiley and his future. There's a new chairman that's come into the board as well. So if there's a new CEO that comes in, what is that going to look like? How does that affect tennis right across the board? And I'm sure they'll review everything in the performance space, which the Davis Cup comes under. But obviously, we take a lot of pride in Davis Cup. We can't be happy with being down in the World Group or World Group 2. I mean, I covered these ties, Christian, years ago. We began at Geelong, the grass courts, zonal tie between Australia and Chinese Taipei. And back then, we didn't have, a great team, but eventually we worked our way back up. But this Davis Cup team is in transition right now. We've got some ageing men. What is the team going to look like going forward? Is a ruler going to be put through some of the players that you've done and we're going to go to the next lot? Or are we going to keep giving, some players who have been pretty loyal more opportunities? But I think it's going to depend on what happens with the leadership of Tennis Australia.
You mentioned Chinese Taipei before. It's a good segue into this last little bit I want to try and wrap up. So obviously we've been relegated to World Group 1 as a result of losing to Ecuador. So these are the potential opponents that Australia can face in that qualifying round. So Chinese Taipei, Peru, Bulgaria, Turkey, Poland, Colombia, Greece, Luxembourg, Monaco, Lithuania, New Zealand, China, and Paraguay. Out of those list of countries, who do you fear the most? For me, it's probably Poland or Greece.
Yeah, and maybe Peru if we're going to go to Peru. Lima.
Yeah. That's not a good place to go.
We don't want to go back to South America if we can avoid it. Oh, look, I mean, all those teams on paper, Australia, for where we sit, we should be pretty competitive. I don't think I fear anyone in that group. Are we going to be due for a home tie? Away tie, that will depend. You would think maybe it might be at home. We'll have to wait and see. September, just after the US Open, but we've got some work to do to get back up, because look at the nations above us at the moment. I mean, they've got good squads, really deep squads who are, really all playing their part, and we've got to find that unit again. I mean, who knows? Is Alex de Minaur going to come back? I mean, he did mention he would be back for September, but now it's a World Group 1 sort of playoff to get back into the World Cup qualifiers next year. Does he play that? Does Poprin play it? We'll wait and see.
A lot of questions still to be unanswered. So as you said, that next round of qualifying to get into the qualifying for the finals next year is played in September. But we'll leave it at that. Thank you for watching. Make sure to follow us on our socials as well. We're trying something new here at The First Serve, uploading more consistent content on our YouTube channel. So be sure to stick around there. And thank you for listening. See you soon.